The armored core of the state of Israel is fundamentally dead. It is not damaged. It is not degraded. It is operationally dead. The primary manufacturing infrastructure is currently actively burning. The heavy maintenance depots have been reduced to aggregate rubble. The centralized logistics hubs, the specific nodes that keep the Merkava fleet operational, have been struck with a level of precision that mathematically eliminates any path to recovery within a timeline relevant to the current conflict. In 3 decades of analyzing mechanized warfare, I have never observed an armored force comprehensively neutralized without a single tank-on-tank engagement. What the Iranian Strategic Command accomplished in a 72-hour window was not a localized tactical victory. It was the systematic, surgical eradication of Israel's ground combat capability. This eradication was executed not on the physical battlefield, but inside the factories, the storage depots, and the supply chains that make modern armored warfare biologically possible. The Merkava platform is not merely a combat vehicle. It represents the absolute foundation of the Israel Defense Forces ground doctrine. It is the armored fist that has exclusively defined Israeli military power since 1967. The entire architectural structure of Israeli ground operations operates on the baseline assumption of continuous Merkava availability. Combined arms doctrine, synchronized artillery coordination, direct infantry support, all of these operational elements are built entirely around armored maneuver, acting as the decisive gravitational center. Strip that specific element away, and what remains is a ground force structurally designed for a specific classification of warfare it can no longer physically conduct. The Iranian intelligence apparatus understood this foundational reality, and over 3 consecutive nights of precision kinetic strikes, they dismantled that reality piece by deliberate piece. The defining characteristic of this specific campaign is the absolute completeness of the targeting architecture. The Iranian strike force did not merely target isolated segments of the critical infrastructure supporting Israel's tank fleet. They engaged and eliminated the entirety of the network within a highly compressed 72-hour operational window. Every major facility involved in heavy production, sustained maintenance, component upgrade, ammunition supply, and logistics distribution was struck, many absorbing multiple impacts in a deliberate sequence. The Tel Hashomer maintenance complex was structurally designated as the primary target, explicitly because its operational capability is irreplaceable. This specific facility is the central node where battle-damaged Merkava tanks are returned for deep repair. It is the exclusive location where engine overhauls are conducted, advanced armor upgrades are installed, and the trophy active protection systems are mathematically integrated into the whole architecture. Eliminate Tel Hashomer, and the entire conceptual framework of maintaining an active tank fleet through sustained combat operations instantly collapses. The Iranian plan, they were meticulously sequenced to collapse specific structures in an order specifically calculated to maximize cascading secondary damage. The reinforced roof of the primary assembly hall was targeted first, brought down systematically to bury the specialized heavy lift equipment and diagnostic tooling underneath thousands of tons of concrete. The adjacent parts warehouses were simultaneously struck, utilizing incendiary warheads. These specific munitions were chosen to ignite the industrial rubber, heavy lubricants, and composite materials stored inside, generating contained thermal fires that burned continuously for 18 hours, consuming an inventory depth that required years of procurement to accumulate. The Hatzerim logistics base, located in the Negev Desert, served a fundamentally different operational function: the immediate distribution of ammunition and critical components. Israel's tank fleet is geographically dispersed across multiple operational theaters, and Hatzerim functioned as the central nervous system through which 120-millimeter tank ammunition, replacement tracks, and fire control system components flowed directly to forward combat units. The ammunition storage capacity at this single location represented approximately 30 days of sustained, high-intensity armored combat consumption. 34 cruise missiles struck this facility. They detonated the hardened ammunition bunkers in a precise kinetic sequence that mathematically propagated through the entire storage complex. The resulting secondary explosions generated a kinetic yield so massive that the event was registered by seismic monitoring stations as far away as the Kingdom of Jordan. However, the precision strikes executed against the EMI factory complex in Ramat HaSharon revealed the true strategic depth of the operation. This phase of the strike was not engineered to produce immediate battlefield effects. It was designed explicitly to permanently eliminate future production capability. The EMI factory produces the foundational Merkava hulls, manufactures the composite armor plates, and serves as the primary integration point for all newly built vehicles. Striking this specific infrastructure does not affect the armored units currently deployed in active service. It ensures, with mathematical certainty, that there will be absolutely no newly manufactured platforms to replace the inevitable combat losses. The targeting precision demonstrated at Ramat HaSharon was operationally remarkable. The incoming warheads successfully isolated and struck the specific production bays where hull welding occurs, the designated cutting stations where armor plate is structurally shaped, and the heavy systems integration halls where the powertrains are married to the chassis. The adjacent administrative buildings were left entirely standing. The civilian worker parking lots remained completely untouched. The strike force engaged only the specific physical coordinates that mattered operationally, and they struck them with precisely enough kinetic force to guarantee total destruction without wasting a single piece of ordnance on irrelevant structures. From a strict intelligence perspective, the execution of this specific strike package reveals an operational baseline that fundamentally alters the regional security calculus. The targeting intelligence possessed by the Iranian command regarding Israeli military infrastructure is not merely adequate. It is comprehensive, current, and structurally precise. You cannot successfully prosecute every critical node within a highly complex industrial ecosystem simultaneously unless you possess explicit knowledge of where those nodes are physically located, what specific mechanical functions they perform, and exactly how they are internally structured. That specific category of granular knowledge is not acquired exclusively through orbital satellite imagery. It is systematically acquired through years of patient, multi-layered intelligence collection. It requires the cultivation of deep human sources, sustained technical surveillance, embedded industrial espionage, and persistent signals intelligence interception. The operational planning required to convert that accumulated intelligence into a synchronized 72-hour kinetic campaign reflects a level of strategic sophistication that the majority of Western defense analysts explicitly assessed Iran did not possess. The empirical result of this intelligence failure is a national tank fleet that currently still exists in a purely physical sense. There are still hundreds of Merkava platforms physically resting in motor pools across Israeli territory. However, they are effectively ghosts. They cannot be mathematically sustained in active combat operations. The timeline of their decay is already established. Within a matter of days, the operational readiness rates across armored battalions will begin a steep terminal decline as heavily stressed vehicles inevitably break down and cannot be mechanically repaired. Within weeks, acute ammunition shortages will force battalion commanders to drastically reduce their suppressive fire rates. Within months, what was once the premier armored maneuvering force in the Middle East will devolve into a completely static asset, physically incapable of projecting mobile combat power. And there is absolutely no rapid operational fix available. The specialized infrastructure that was eliminated cannot be rapidly reconstructed. It is an industrial death sentence executed with absolute patience. The rapid degradation of the armored fleet exposes a fundamental flaw in modern Western military architecture. The Merkava Mark IV represents the absolute cutting edge of main battle tank design. It features highly sophisticated fire control computers, layered modular composite armor, and a 1,500 horsepower engine capable of propelling 65 tons of armored mass at surprising operational velocities. By any strictly technical measurement, It is one of the most lethal and capable mechanized platforms currently in service anywhere in the world. However, pure technical capability and logistical sustainability are fundamentally different operational metrics. What the precision strikes exposed is that the extreme technical sophistication of the Merkava platform was acquired at the direct cost of its logistical resilience. Modern main battle tanks are not simple, self-contained machines. The vehicle contains thousands of highly integrated components. The vast majority of these are specialized elements that cannot be sourced from commercial civilian suppliers. They must be manufactured to exacting military specifications by cleared defense contractors possessing technical capabilities that only a fractional handful of global corporations maintain. The thermal imaging systems, the primary fire control computers, the heavy transmissions required to manage the massive engine torque, these are not off-the-shelf items. When they inevitably break down, they must be replaced with components manufactured exclusively for that specific chassis, stored in specialized climate-controlled facilities, and mechanically installed by highly trained technicians utilizing diagnostic equipment that physically exists at only a few geographic locations. Combat operations inherently stress mechanical systems significantly beyond their standard design parameters. Sustained, high-intensity operations accelerate mechanical wear rates to extreme levels that require continuous, uninterrupted maintenance support. By destroying the Tel Hashomer complex, the Iranian strike force did not physically eliminate the tanks in the field. They eliminated the only domestic facilities capable of performing deep engine rebuilds, transmission overhauls, and fire control diagnostics. This vulnerability is most perfectly demonstrated by the Trophy Active Protection System. The Trophy system is extraordinarily capable. It has empirically demonstrated high intercept rates against incoming anti-tank guided missiles during active combat conditions, providing crews with a localized layer of protection that few other mechanized forces possess. But the system is also extraordinarily complex. It requires continuous electrical power generation, specialized external radar components, and physical interceptor munitions that must be mechanically reloaded after each individual engagement. It also requires constant software updates that flow exclusively through centralized systems integration channels. When the specialized maintenance and supply infrastructure supporting Trophy is reduced to rubble, the system simply cannot be sustained. Tanks equipped with the system that expend their interceptor loads cannot be reloaded if the specific facilities that store, calibrate, and distribute those munitions no longer exist. A multi-million-dollar defense system becomes dead weight on the turret. Compare this structural fragility with the sustainability model that Iran and its regional proxies employ for their own armored forces. The Iranian mechanized fleets, primarily consisting of T-72 variants and domestically upgraded models, are constructed upon a fundamentally different design philosophy. They are objectively less sophisticated and less capable in pure isolated technical terms. However, they are exponentially more sustainable under hostile field conditions. The mechanical parts are simpler. Routine and deep maintenance can be performed by field crews with significantly less specialized equipment. Their supply chain does not depend on a handful of centralized, irreplaceable, and easily targetable industrial facilities. The strategic metric is not which tank performs better in a theoretical, isolated engagement. The operational metric is which specific force structure can mathematically sustain combat operations when the underlying logistics architecture comes under direct, sustained kinetic attack. Iran empirically demonstrated that technical complexity, when devoid of industrial resilience, is a fatal strategic vulnerability. This specific operational lesson is currently generating severe concern within global defense establishments. This vulnerability is not unique to the Middle East. Every major Western military that has pursued high-end technical capability as the foundation of its force structure has unknowingly built an identical dependency on specialized, centralized, and difficult-to-replace infrastructure. The American Abrams, the German Leopard, the British Challenger, every single one of these premier platforms requires a highly sensitive logistical ecosystem They are all inherently vulnerable to the exact category of systematic infrastructure targeting that was just successfully executed. Technical superiority at the individual platform level is rendered completely meaningless if the entire logistics architecture that keeps it functioning can be eliminated in 72 hours of precision strikes. The internal strategic discussions within the Pentagon following the initial damage assessments followed a highly predictable pattern. Initial proposals centered on emergency tank transfers, specifically airlifting M1 Abrams platforms from United States Army active stocks to serve as an immediate operational stopgap. Secondary proposals involved the accelerated delivery of critical tank components and ammunition from American strategic depots. However, operational reality immediately invalidated these proposals. Transferring American tanks into the theater does not resolve the fundamental maintenance infrastructure void. The Merkava and the Abrams are mathematically non-interchangeable systems. They utilize entirely different ammunition profiles, distinct fuel requirements, incompatible mechanical parts, and completely divergent maintenance procedures. Israeli armored crews possess training exclusive to the Merkava platform. The domestic maintenance personnel and the entire integrated logistics system are strictly designed around Merkava supply requirements. Introducing a completely different heavy platform into that paralyzed structure does not fill the operational gap. It structurally creates new ones. The defense establishment would be forced to sustain two different tank fleets, relying on two different logistics chains, while the physical infrastructure supporting both has been reduced to rubble. Furthermore, emergency parts shipments offer zero operational value when the physical facilities required to install those parts no longer exist. Military transport aircraft can successfully airlift replacement tank engines into the theater. However, if the specialized maintenance bays required to mechanically integrate those engines have been structurally collapsed, the engines remain permanently sealed in their transit crates. The Pentagon can deliver replacement trophy interceptor munitions, but if the integration facilities where those interceptors are digitally loaded onto the tanks have been struck, the munitions cannot be deployed. The critical operational bottleneck is not supply availability. The bottleneck is the specialized industrial infrastructure required to convert raw supplies into projected combat capability. There is an additional, deeper strategic parameter that Washington is forced to confront but systematically refuses to acknowledge publicly. American heavy tank production capacity is strictly limited, and domestic operational stocks are not infinite. The United States maintains a calculated strategic reserve of armored vehicles. However, those reserves exist explicitly to support American operational requirements, not to wholesale replace the tank fleet of an allied nation. Transferring hundreds of main battle tanks to compensate for the infrastructure strikes would severely degrade American operational readiness for contingencies in other primary theaters. These specific contingencies include potential high-intensity conflict scenarios involving China and Russia, scenarios that the Pentagon calculates as possessing significantly higher strategic priority than the Middle East. This calculation exposes the brutal reality of alliance relationships when the operational costs escalate into strategic risk. The United States will reliably provide material support up to the precise threshold where that support does not mathematically compromise core American strategic interests. Beyond that specific threshold, the regional partner is operating entirely on its own. The systematic eradication of the tank maintenance and production infrastructure has pushed the cost of meaningful military support far beyond what Washington can safely provide without accepting unacceptable structural risk to its own force. This scenario exposes the fundamental terminal fragility of national security architectures built upon external logistical dependency. The Israeli ground forces were designed around the foundational assumption that American logistics would permanently function as an available, unlimited backup. That assumption remained functionally viable only as long as the operational demand on American logistics never exceeded the threshold of what Washington was politically and materially willing to provide. The 72-hour precision strike campaign generated a mechanical demand that drastically exceeds that threshold. The Israeli defense establishment is now empirically discovering the operational outcome when the external cavalry does not arrive, specifically because that cavalry possesses overriding commitments in other geographic theaters. I have observed military establishments lose their primary combat capabilities in previous conflicts. I observed the systematic dismantling of Iraqi armored forces in 1991 and again in 2003. However, what is currently occurring within the Israeli defense architecture represents a fundamentally different operational paradigm. The Iraqi military lost its armored forces to direct kinetic combat destruction on the physical battlefield. Israel is losing its armored capability without the tanks ever being destroyed in combat. They are being systematically eliminated through absolute logistics starvation. This specific reality generates a severe, cascading doctrinal crisis. The entire organizational structure of the Israeli ground forces assumes armored maneuver as the absolute foundation. Israeli ground doctrine is rigidly built around combined arms teams. Infantry, armor, artillery, and engineers are designed to operate in highly coordinated packages where each element mathematically supports the others. The armor provides the protected mobility and direct fire capability. The infantry provides close-in security and urban operational capacity. The artillery provides suppressive fires. Strip the armor component out of that equation, and the structural integrity collapses. The infantry suddenly becomes highly vulnerable to enemy armor that the ground force can no longer mechanically counter. The artillery loses the physical protection that armor provides during forward movement. What this means in practical operational terms is that the ground combat capability is degrading significantly faster than the mechanical breakdown rate alone would suggest. Units historically trained exclusively to operate as combined arms teams are now forced to figure out how to operate as isolated infantry or artillery forces. Concurrently, Iran and its regional partners, including aligned forces in Syria and Lebanon, retain their armored capabilities fully intact. They are now operating against an adversary whose ability to counter armor has been strategically erased. An isolated infantry force confronting dug-in positions supported by active armor operates at a catastrophic tactical disadvantage. That is the exact mathematical situation the defense forces now face in any scenario where ground operations are attempted. This is the empirical definition of operational defeat in 21st century warfare. It is not characterized by the dramatic, cinematic collapse of forces on a battlefield. It is characterized by the quiet, systematic elimination of the logistics and industrial infrastructure that makes sustained operations mathematically possible. The tanks are physically still there. The soldiers are still there. But the functional capability to employ them effectively is gone. We have just witnessed the operational confirmation of a strategic principle that the post-Cold War era permitted defense planners to ignore. Wars are not won by the side possessing the most technologically advanced equipment. They are won by the side that possesses the capacity to sustain operations longer. That specific sustainability requires profound depth in production, in logistics, and in the human capital of trained technicians. Depth of that kind only originates from self-reliant industrial development over long periods of time. It cannot be purchased, it cannot be instantly transferred, and it cannot be borrowed when the crisis arrives. Dream systematically built that strategic depth. Israel outsourced it, and that single variable is now defining the trajectory of the war. The infrastructure required to sustain an advanced armored fleet took decades to build. It was systematically eliminated in exactly 72 hours. The resulting strategic reality is absolute. The anticipated ground war, the conflict that the entire region feared, has now become structurally impossible for one side to actually fight.